Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China. If you walk past a kindergarten, at the moment the doors open to let the kids out, you'll see kids running out. They're usually happy, they're excited. They often have a card or something they've made, which they're quite anxious to show to the adult who picks them up. They'll excitedly tell the adult what it is they've achieved, and they'll chatter non-stop, often while waving to their friends and shouting goodbyes to the teacher who supervised them while they were waiting until the pickup. In Guangdong, when we see that, the language is usually Cantonese, but some high migrant cities such as Shenzhen or Dongguan, it might be different. You'll hear a range of different languages, sometimes a mix of Cantonese and Mandarin, and sometimes something you wouldn't recognize. When I traveled in Xinjiang, I saw the same thing. The language was a form of Arabic. I recently spent 3 weeks in Shanghai, and the language that they were using there was all Mandarin. In 2017, and again in 2018, I spent periods of time working in Hohhot, the capital of Inner Mongolia. I was working in a school, and the language that I heard there was Mongolian. I'm currently, at the time of writing this, in Hainan, even though I'm home now. Hainan province is an island, and I was in the region of Lingshui. I couldn't understand the language they were speaking around me. Then I found out that it was Lingshui Li Autonomous County that I was in, but more on that in a moment. All these different regions have something in common. They're in China, and they are Chinese. China has 56 ethnicities, 55 of which are known as the ethnic minorities, or Shaoshu Minzu. Han is the big one. There are also 297 recognized languages, and Mandarin is the big one. Many people outside of China are unaware that languages here are not always indicators of ethnicity. For example, Cantonese speakers are one of the largest groups of all. Hong Kong, Guangdong, much of southern Guangxi, and parts of Hainan even speak Cantonese as their first language. But most of them are Han Chinese, although some are not. People who support China point to the fact that the 5 main languages in China are shown on the currency. Examine any Chinese note and you'll see Mandarin, Tibetan, Mongolian, Uyghur, and Zhuang. We can also see, for the benefit of readers of most other languages, especially English, the use of pinyin, which is the Romanization of Chinese. That China uses these languages has been criticized as tokenism by some experts. But it's far more significant than either they know or they are willing to tell us. Each of these languages presented on the paper currency is a language of one of the autonomous regions. Xinjiang, Uyghur; Tibet, Tibetan. Ningxia is a Hui Muslim area, but it doesn't use a different language. Guangxi, Zhuang. And of course, Inner Mongolia, where they do speak Mongolian. None of these regions, autonomous regions, existed before 1950. They were created by the Communist Party of China to give larger minorities some degree of autonomy over their own governance. Critical linguistic experts often point out there are errors in the language, but they don't live in the region. They're usually Westerners and often linguistic purists who should understand that written forms of language such as Uyghur's Arabic script have changed over many years. These have been changed by both time and geography, not by the CPC. The language used in Xinjiang is that of the local people of Xinjiang. They brought it to the region when they arrived about 1,000 years ago, in the same way that English language used in America is that of the Americans. And it no longer reflects pure English, or the English spoken by, for example, the royal family, or the BBC. Both the Uyghur and English languages have evolved. At the time Uyghurs were moving into Xinjiang, William, Duke of Normandy, was busy conquering England. We should not be critical of minor changes. We should be in awe of the fact that these languages still exist at all in these days of modern communication. Widespread media and globalization have changed languages forever, but most regional and minority languages don't change. Travel through China and note the differences throughout China. Almost every single sign in mainland China is in Chinese and Pinyin. We can at least read the destination of the bus, even if we don't know where that location is. But the moment you arrive in an autonomous region, the signs are still in Chinese, but now they're in a local language too. All the shops have signage in local languages. Restaurant menus are in Chinese and local languages. This is not a tourist gimmick. This is a genuine need to communicate with people, some of whom have not learned Chinese. They're usually elders who didn't have the good fortune that young people now have of at least 10 years of free education, except Tibet. Wow, education there is free for 15 years, from kindergarten all the way to university graduation. Yes, part of the education is in Mandarin, but then most of the university places will not be taken up in Tibet. There are only 3 Tibetan universities, and 39% of all students graduate to higher education, so they mostly travel to other parts of China where they go and learn for free. Tibet now has a 99.5% literacy rate compared to 5% in 1951. What's more, in Tibet, it's mandatory for all students to learn Tibetan, even if they're Han. Another little known aspect is that if the family in Tibet is rural and is in poverty, and their child attends school and even wins a place in university, it means the family get a monthly cash allowance too, because that child isn't available to work with them or support them until after completing education. Inner Mongolia, despite what we're reading in Western media, such as the recent Economist article that I've linked, has the same kinds of rules. They were implemented in September 2021 in time for the new school year and are making headlines again, mostly because of either a misunderstanding or perhaps it's not misunderstanding, it's misinformation. The new regulations call for Mandarin education language in language and literature, politics and history, while mathematics, science, art, music and physical education continue to be taught in Mongolian throughout Inner Mongolia. There is no effort to eradicate the language from schools, and certainly no intent to eradicate it from society. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The Inner Mongolian government, which itself is comprised of a large number of Mongolians, issued a statement to confirm they have no intention of phasing out Mongolian language in schools. Bear in mind that because of the nature of autonomous governance, the languages that were supposedly being phased out would be phased out by a decision by local ethnic leaders, not central government, which is another reason why we can be assured it's not China that's making this up. China, we know, is a vast country. Geographic barriers, historical migration, boundary changes over millennia, they've all created ethnic diversity under one modern flag and within the boundaries of what we now call China. There is one language that is understood by all across the length and breadth. In the West, we know it as Mandarin, but in China it's called Putonghua, literally meaning common speech. For the country to teach in any other language than this would be stupid. But each region also has its own TV stations, radio stations, media, newspapers in their own language, so people can remain in touch with their cultural roots. China Television 1, CCTV 1, in Inner Mongolia, for example, broadcasts in Mongolian. There's a clear example there of the pot calling the kettle black. A country of comparable geographic size to China is the USA. It also has ethnic minorities. The US formally recognizes 574 American Indian tribes. But instead of being encouraged to retain their culture, language, and traditions, they're marginalized. They're sent to reservations where many live to this day in poverty and ill health. Several efforts have been made to assimilate them into white man's culture, all unsuccessful. Other ethnic minorities in the USA are a little luckier. New Mexico has the highest rate of non-whites with 47.7% Hispanic or Latino, but they have no autonomy. The New Mexico government, though, is the only state in the USA to provide a constitutional right to Spanish learning in their schools. The other 49 states, despite 23 of them having between 10 and 39% Hispanic populations, have no such rights. There are no public schools in the USA which teach in any of the Native American languages. There are only 11 states where schools even mention Native Americans in their curriculum. That's from an American educational website. There's no evidence anywhere in the United States of any effort to write any Native American language. Presumably, this is because at the time of settlement, there were no known writings in North America, although Central and South America did have. But even they are all gone now. Whilst we're looking at the irony of a colonial power criticizing China for something it has done while China is not doing what it says it's doing, let's not forget the ultimate irony of one major factor in this debate: Mongolia, the country, and Inner Mongolia, the Chinese autonomous region, share the same language and culture, but only one of them uses the ancient written form. Mongolia, the country, abandoned Mongolian script in 1941. China is very proud of the fact that if you want to read Mongolian, you can do it, not in Mongolia, but you can do it in Inner Mongolia. In Mongolia, it only exists in historical or artworks. You need to come to the Chinese autonomous region where it's a vibrant and living language. Stand outside of a school in North America and listen to the kids chattering. You'll almost certainly hear English, maybe some Spanish. Visit Wales or Scotland, and again, you hear them speaking English. Compare that with my experiences last week of hearing the Li minority language for the first time, of seeing kids in Ningxia one day, in Gansu the next, and a week later being in Xinjiang, and a few months later in Inner Mongolia, all these kids speaking different languages that I don't understand. Inside a Guangdong school, you'll hear Mandarin. Inside a Mongolian school, you'll hear a mix of Mongolian and Mandarin. Inside the Tibetan school, you'll hear Tibetan and Mandarin. Inside the Xinjiang school, you'll hear Uyghur, Kazakh, Tajik, or any one of a dozen other languages, plus Mandarin. And this is exactly as it should be. A blend of linguistic, cultural, and traditional retention with an education that allows them to live, work, study, or even marry into another part of the huge country that they call home. Experts would criticize China if the country didn't teach Mandarin to its minorities, and that would be a fair criticism. Thanks once again for watching Jerry's Take on China, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.